remember that I would point out that about 72%, don't let me overstate, 72% of our budget is public safety, public works. Is that looking?
Yeah.
That's not those are very police, fire, picking up sanitation collections, maintenance of roads. It's not, those are not fringe services that the city provides.
The fee schedule, and you're calling this a fee, it's not a tax, correct?
It's in no way a tax, and well, I mean, it may be perceived.
The reason I ask if it's a tax is because we're dealing with a 1 mil tax release from the county, so we're replacing one tax with another tax.
What will happen is the property tax relief will only go to taxable properties because they're the only ones that will pay taxes to start with. So and that relief will be based on property value. So higher value properties will receive more offset, just because it'll be a change in the property tax rate. We don't consider this to meet any definition of a tax per se. Not that it really matters to the payer, but we don't consider that because of the fact that it's based on impervious surface that can sometimes be no relationship at all to the value of the property. For instance, you might have a very high value office building, for instance, like the Denny's Tower, which is 17 stories tall. So it has a huge square footage, but a very small footprint. And its fee payment will be based on its footprint, as opposed to its square footage, because that's what's contributes to the stormwater system. And other examples of how that plays out sort of differently is you might have some totally tax exempt by virtue of their ownership properties, like the hospital system that was in the paper today, and other not-for-profits that have never received any form of property tax bill that will participate in this, and if it's passed. So we don't consider it we don't think of it as a tax because it doesn't have the typical relationships towards some other indicator that a tax would.
The amounts on the fee schedule, is this the net after the tax relief?
No, sir. It is the additional. The net after the tax relief will vary so widely based on how high value the individual property is that there's no way of. I mean, it'll be 1 mil on the relief across the property tax bill, and so an individual property owner could look at their last property tax bill and compute that and see that there. But
so this could be a wash.
It could. I guess that's possible, but it'd have to be perfectly honest. It'd have to be a very, very high value, very, very small footprint, and in that case, it could be a wash. But it'll be whether it's a 50% offset or whatever percentage offset will be dependent upon what that property value is and what that footprint is. If that makes sense. I'm not trying to evade the question. I just can't answer.
I'm just trying to come to some reasonable determination about what the real cost is.
If it helps, I looked at our budget, folks, when I looked at a $100,000 home, it has no other offset. 1 mil is about $4 per house, and the proposed fee for a typical fee would be $250 per month for the houses less than $1,640. So you could say there's generally a $4 tax offset, and there's going to be an additional fee of $30. So the net increase.
So they get a month and a half free.
That hypothetical house is $25.
Thank you.
Robert, did you have a question? Renee?
Mr. Mayor, I just have one comment. Chris, could you reiterate for me, this is an unfunded mandate, is that correct? The imposition of the stormwater and the regulations by the EPA, state and federal, what we're having to, I'm probably not explaining it correctly, but that the level that we're having to meet is regulated at the state and the federal level.
Absolutely. They do not care how we choose to fund it or how we choose to determine the fair share of any citizen or property owner, whatever the case may be. They have no stake in that. But the mandate is we will produce cleaner water and healthier streams. We will have systems in place that guard against any property damage from stormwater, environmental or otherwise. That's the mandate. Is that we have to do those things, and they left it up to the local jurisdictions of how to pay for them. But that said, I think it's important to recognize that the General Assembly in South Carolina set up enabling legislation for a stormwater utility just like ours, in part recognizing that communities would seek other ways as opposed to property taxes to pay for this. So they anticipated that several years ago, set up a mechanism. The other thing I would point out about that is I believe we are the largest South Carolina municipality, and it's widespread policy across, that doesn't have one of these, and it's widespread policy across the state of North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, to fund the system based on this. We don't know of another community our size that doesn't have something that ties the cost of the stormwater system to the footprint of the impervious surface that the property has. Everybody has chosen that as being fairer than going with some other way of paying for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Linda?
Let's say we go ahead and pass the stormwater fee. Just like the gentleman from, I think it was Gentry Street, and he was saying that the overflow, how immediately when we look at taking care of things like that?
Well, there are two types of problems that we will be addressing, and I'll say these in layman's terms, and Jake can talk about more specific examples. There's those that create a sort of an urgent need through public safety or potential property damage. And it just so happens it wasn't our pipe, but the street closure there on Henry Street that we've experienced the last few days was because somebody discovered some structural instability under Henry Street because of a stormwater problem. So those things go right to the top of the list. If you have a situation where a sinkhole or something like that can interrupt the flow of traffic, interrupt the ability for people to go about their business, and threats. And then the second category would be those things that are tied to improving the water quality piece, which may or may not have any direct, those will be things that relate to making the streams and creeks healthier and meet the EPA requirements. So those are kind of the...
But if my property is eroding and I'm paying this fee, I'm going to be awful ticket at somebody.
Yes, ma'am. We understand there'll be quite a bit of that, and the framework that we'll look at is upstream and downstream impacts. In other words, if there's potential for a property downstream to be adversely impacted, the relative priority goes up. If there's change in either upstream or downstream, plus the engineering techniques are much better now than they were when most of our neighborhoods were built. That's just human nature. You get better over time, and you learn more and that kind of thing. So newer developments tend to have a much higher level of control over their stormwater, which is a factor in that. So a lot of the dollars ultimately spent in our older communities.
Mr. Mayor, I do have one question. What will the impact be on our school district? I'm sure we have to look at that.
We have an example that we used in one of our charts of one individual school, but we have not summed up all of District 7 properties. We're working on area-wide projections. We haven't actually done the review of each individual property. So,
what we did just for estimation, we use every parcel and a baseline of 65% impervious. When I looked at Spartan High School, for instance, it's about 51 acres. It's actually 43% impervious. So we would have to go through and look at every single one of, say, District 7 and District